O conhecimento da verdade liberta.
When a CDC scientist who'd been there at that time 17 years tells you this is how you access data, it didn't take me very long to realize, oh, I better do what he says because he knows what he's talking about.
I just want to tell you one thing. Right now, I'm sitting in a very pretty position in terms of providing you a lot of information.
He asked me, what data sets are you going to request? And I said, well, I'm going to request 2 of the studies that you've done on thimerosal, the mercury-containing preservative that's used in some of the vaccines. And he said, well, that's fine, but I want you to request the MMR data set first. And this is the study by Frank DiStefano and his colleagues in 2004.
It was the one study where we could end up creating a mess while the CDC tried to sort out something they couldn't understand.
The day Billy got the MMR was a living nightmare. It was the worst day of my life, to be honest with you.
I came in and I saw him lying in his cot, listless. He started this uncontrollable shaking. Imagine coming out of a frozen pond.
His eyes were doing this and he was shaking like this.
And I remember she grasped him and held him really tight to her chest.
There's immediate fear in John and there's immediate, Mummy, this is not going to happen. Well, I don't know what is wrong with you, but this is not going to happen. And we get to hospital, we rush him in, doctors are coming in and looking at him, and that's when they said, he's had a reaction, he's had a seizure, this is normal, this is common for many, many children who have this vaccination. It's absolutely okay, he's going to be fine. Nobody ever told me that there would be any side effect to any of the vaccinations my children had.
Following his febrile convulsion that he had the same day of the MMR, we were told to take him home.
He slept in the bed with us for the night. He seemed just very, very sleepy. In fact, he didn't really ever wake up to the Billy that we had before.
For me, it became really necessary to start looking at what types of medical issues are these children going through? What are the other factors that have affected them, that have brought them to this level of symptomology that we call autism? This is now probably the mid-90s. I came to notice that there was a very high use of antibiotics amongst these children. But B, what became pretty interesting was seeing the number of families who were reporting that their child had a regressive type of behavior occur right after their vaccinations. A lot of these parents were showing me footage of their children who had been completely developing normally until 18 months, and then all of a sudden post-vaccination had developed incredible regression. Children who had speech anywhere close to 50 to 100 words and had completely lost all of their words. Children who were extremely attached and interactive with their parents and had suddenly become isolated, no longer responding to their own name. And this was all happening right after their MMR vaccines.
My oldest son, Ian, was born normal, developing normally. He was this beautiful boy, and we ended up at our 12-month visit, which is his 1 year. Then they gave him multiple vaccines at once. And within 7 days, he had 104 fever and a rash all over his body. He had previously been noted in our videos, home videos, that he was walking and actually running at that point. 7 days after the vaccine, he was no longer able to do that. He was falling down. he became a really sick little boy.
So the question for those of us investigating autism is age of exposure to MMR a risk for autism? And in order to understand why that might be, you have to understand something of the history of MMR vaccine. In 1987, there was an MMR vaccine that was being used in Canada, produced by SmithKline Beecham. And that vaccine caused meningitis. It was recognized quickly, and that vaccine was withdrawn in Canada. However, in the same month that it was withdrawn in Ontario, it was licensed in the UK. The name was simply changed from Trivirix to Pluzirix. In the UK, it was used for 4 years, and likewise, it caused meningitis and had to be rapidly withdrawn. There was a public outcry. There was an acute loss of confidence by the public in vaccine policymakers, and the vaccine should, at that point, have been destroyed. It wasn't. It was then shipped to developing countries like Brazil, where it was used in a mass vaccination campaign. And there was an epidemic of meningitis, which was entirely predictable. Now, scientists studied that epidemic, and what they found is that the risk for meningitis was associated with age of exposure. The younger you got the MMR vaccine, the greater the risk of meningitis. For people like me investigating autism, the question was, is there a similar risk in autism? Is age of exposure to MMR a risk for autism just as it was for meningitis? We shared with the US Congress and the CDC the hypothesis.
The story as told to us, at which we have an obligation to report, is that the majority of children regressed following a period of normal development in the face of MMR vaccination. That does not mean it is the cause of the disease.
The Institute of Medicine is a body of scientists and physicians that review the available data on vaccine safety and then advise our government on vaccine research policy. Well, because Andy Wakefield had put forth this theory that the age at which you receive the MMR may increase your risk of autism, the IOM looked to the CDC to do that very study. It was a study about timing. Does the earlier you receive the MMR vaccine increase the risk of autism?
When we talk about the MMR study, nobody had ever requested those data because it was a big secret that you could do it. Thompson told me to email such and such a person, and then on the inside, I also found out that one of the people preparing these data sets for me was Bill Thompson.
They don't really want people to know that this data exists. Again, you know, I just can't believe we actually got you that data.
Thompson couldn't send these documents directly to Brian Hooker because that would have been illegal. What Thompson identified was a legal loophole that is referred to as a citizen's request. That allowed Thompson to deliver to Brian Hooker potentially classified information in a legal way.
You get checked in England with your babies at certain times by health visitors. So at 9 months, Billy had his full-blown check, and it says no parental concerns, baby laughing, babbling, talking. So we passed that with flying colours. 18 months is when they next come in. And by this time, we know there's something seriously wrong with Billy.
Probably within 5 or 6 days, the first signs really was this vacancy. He wasn't the same smiley little baby that he was before. He had a blank expression. Then the diarrhea kicked in.
His tummy started to get bigger and bigger, bloated, rock hard bloated tummy. He would start to walk on tiptoes. His hair fell out, and this dreadful high-pitched scream, sort of whiny scream developed from him. And then came the head banging, the constant banging against his crib, the constant banging against the floor or a wall or anything that he could find to bang his head on. He would thrash it and thrash it. John and I would lie in bed at night just listening to this thud, thud, thud.
Thud.
There's nothing. He's now not even noticing his sister who he used to play with. John comes through the front door after work. No recognition that we were his parents or this child even belonged to us. Nothing, gone.
I mean, that was the time where our boy changed from what he was to a real tragic case of a child who regressed into this autistic state and lost everything. Lost everything.
The CDC, the way that they do research studies is very reactionary. They look at something that's creating a press and creating a buzz that could actually lower vaccination rates, and that's what they study. They don't study vaccines proactively. So if Andy had never done his original study, gotten that published in The Lancet, would have never created the uproar that rightfully it should have created, then the CDC would have never studied this.
The press conference for the Lancet paper was called by the Dean of the medical school, who was the chairman of the media committee.
The temporal association between MMR and autism was initially made in the United States.
I had done an extensive research into measles vaccine safety and MMR vaccine safety in the pre-licensing phase. In other words, what safety studies had been done before these vaccines were put onto the market and into children. The 250-page report was compiled by me showing that the vaccine safety studies for MMR in particular were lamentable. They were lamentable. There are many assumptions have been made about the safety of this vaccine, and there had been problems which had been airbrushed. So I wrote to my colleagues and the Dean, and I said, going forward, there are going to be questions about what parents should do next. I cannot, in due conscience, support the continued use of the MMR vaccine, having done this research. I said I will continue to vigorously support the use of the single vaccine, but can no longer support the use of the triple MMR vaccine. So the Dean, as chairman of that committee, had three choices. He could have not had a press conference. He could have banned me from the press conference. Or, when the question came up, as inevitably it would, what do parents do next about vaccinating their children? He knew what my response would be. He could deflect the question to someone else. When the question came up on the day, he directed it straight to me.
To assure you, we are not adults or section of the need for measles vaccination, but we are all agreed on. That is extremely important.
All I recommended at that press conference was that parents opt for the use of the single vaccines, single measles, single mumps, single rubella, until the issue had been resolved scientifically. What happened when I made that recommendation? Unilateral decisions were made by the government in the UK to withdraw the importation license for the single vaccines, Merck opting in the US to cease the production of the single vaccines, giving parents no option. I said to a senior representative of the Department of Health, why, if your objective is to protect children against serious infectious disease, why would you take away the option of how parents do that? And she said, because if we allowed parents the choice of single vaccines, it would destroy our MMR program. In other words, the concern was for the protection of the program over and above the protection of children.
No one's career has ever been